This story was submitted by a Reddit user who experienced the chilling events firsthand. She has advised us to keep her identity private to protect her privacy and peace of mind. The following account is a faithful retelling of her experience. I never believed in ghosts or spirits. Growing up, I was the kind of person who laughed at horror movies and rolled my eyes at ghost stories. But the house on Blackwood Lane changed all that. I moved into the house alone just a few months ago, excited to start fresh after a bad breakup. The price was too good to be true, but I didn't question it, but I should have. The first week was uneventful. I spent my days unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling into my new life. The house was old, built in the early 1900s, with creaky floors and drafty windows, but it had character, and I liked that. It was on the 8th night that things began to change. I remember it clearly because it was the first night I had decided to sleep in the master bedroom. The previous nights I had been sleeping in the guest room since it was smaller and felt cozier. But the master bedroom had a large bay window that overlooked the overgrown garden, and I thought it might be nice to wake up to that view. As I lay in bed reading a book, I heard a faint whisper. I dismissed it as the wind whistling through the old windows. But then I heard it again, louder this time. It was unmistakably a voice, soft and almost pleading. I sat up, straining to listen. "Help me," it whispered. My heart raced, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I got out of bed, turned on the light, and looked around the room. There was no one there. I checked the hallway and the other rooms, but everything was as it should be. I convinced myself it was my imagination and went back to bed, leaving the light on. The next few nights, the whispering continued. Sometimes it was just a few words, other times it was a soft, incoherent murmuring. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but the tone was always the same, desperate and sorrowful. Sleep became elusive, and I found myself dreading the nights. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard the whisper again. This time it was accompanied by a cold draft that seemed to emanate from nowhere. I pulled the covers up to my chin and squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would go away. Suddenly the whisper turned into a scream. "Help me," it shrieked, and my eyes flew open. The room was freezing, my breath visible in the dim light. I jumped out of bed and ran to the hallway, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. Despite the cold, I decided to sleep in the guest room again, hoping it would offer some relief. But the whispering followed me there too. Desperate for answers, I began researching the history of the house. I found old newspaper articles about a family that had lived there in the 1920s. The mother, Emily, had gone mad after the death of her young daughter, Clara. She had been found dead in the master bedroom, an apparent suicide. Clara's body was never recovered. I was convinced that the spirit of Emily or Clara was haunting the house. I reached out to a local historian, Mrs. Thompson, who had written extensively about the town's history. She agreed to meet me at the house to discuss what I had found. Mrs. Thompson was a small elderly woman with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor. She arrived one afternoon carrying a large leather-bound book. We sat in the living room and she began to tell me about Emily and Clara. Emily was a loving mother, Mrs. Thompson said, but when Clara died, she couldn't cope. She believed Clara's spirit was trapped in the house, and she became obsessed with finding a way to communicate with her. As Mrs. Thompson spoke, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room. The lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. Mrs. Thompson looked around nervously. "Do you feel that?" she asked. I nodded, my heart pounding. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house. We both jumped, and Mrs. Thompson clutched her book tightly. "It's Emily," she whispered. "She's here." The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in front of me. The whispering began again, louder and more frantic than ever. Help me," I cried. Mrs. Thompson stood up, her face pale. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "Now." We hurried to the front door. but it wouldn't budge. It felt like an invisible force was holding it shut. Panic set in as the whispering grew louder, filling my ears and drowning out all other sounds. "Emily, stop," Mrs. Thompson shouted. "We mean you no harm." The whispering stopped abruptly, and the room fell silent. The door swung open on its own, and we stumbled outside, gasping for breath. Mrs. Thompson looked shaken, but she quickly composed herself. "You need to leave this house," she said firmly. "Emily's spirit is trapped here, and she won't rest until she finds Clara." I nodded, my mind racing. I couldn't stay in the house any longer, but I didn't know where to go. I decided to stay with a friend for a few days while I figured out what to do next. The night I left, I had a dream. I was standing in the master bedroom, and Emily was there, her face twisted in anguish. She reached out to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Help me find Clara," she whispered. "Please." I woke up with a start, my heart racing. I knew what I had to do. I returned to the house the next day, determined to help Emily find peace. I searched every room, every nook and cranny, looking for any clue that might lead me to Clara. In the attic, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets, I found a small wooden box. Inside was a child's locket with a picture of Emily and Clara. There was also a letter written in Emily's shaky handwriting. To whoever finds this, it read, "Please forgive me. I couldn't bear to live without my Clara. She's here in the house. Please help her find peace." Tears filled my eyes as I read the letter. I knew what I had to do. I took the locket to the local cemetery where Emily was buried. I placed him on her grave and whispered a prayer for her and Clara. As I stood there, I felt a warmth wash over me. The air was still and calm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. I knew that Emily and Clara had finally found each other and their spirits were at rest. I sold the house on Blackwood Lane soon after, never looking back. The memories of my time there still haunt me, but I find comfort in knowing that Emily and Clara are together, free from the torment that once bound them to the house. And as for me, I no longer laugh at ghost stories, because now I know they're real.